We are live.
Nice. I'm so excited for today. I couldn't wait for Tuesday at noon with Curtis.
I know. It's
It's going to be good.
Tuesday at noon has never been a time and day I've looked forward to, but until now,
Not today in the middle of December.
right. Feels like December
Oh,
today too. Is it cold in Boston?
it is chilly. It's
Yeah.
very chilly. How about there?
Yeah, we were below freezing. We had frost everywhere this morning. So
Well, you're not used to that in North Carolina, so I would say I'm faring better than you.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, I'm excited to be here today with you. Just for our audience, we're going to do some quick introductions, and then we're going to step into really understanding less than truckload. We're going to call it LTL, but it's the mode of less than truckload. We're going to talk about like how do you compose a rate in LTL? What are the components of establishing an LTL rate? We're going to talk about, strategy around negotiating LTL rates. We're going to talk about how technology and data supports all of that, and really getting into some, real world case studies that we'll share, so you can start maybe visualizing some of this and thinking about it if you're a shipper out there today, or even a carrier. How shippers and carriers think about LTL strategies, and how we've been thinking about it and really consulting through it since 1988. And then a little bit around, we talk a lot about managed transportation and how it drives a lot of value and benefit to shippers, but really what it drives the carriers too. And so I'm really hoping, Curtis, you're going to dig in on that with us as well, because there's a lot of benefits with working with a managed trans service. Again, not just for shippers, but carriers alike. So great.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
thank you for being here. And I would love if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick introduction for our audience. That would be great.
Yep, that was a good summary, good lead up into this. Also encouraging everybody watching to pop comments in through LinkedIn, and we'll do our best to address them live here in the session. So yeah, I'm Curtis Garrett. Just to intro myself real quick. Have been in the LTL industry for 16 years. The first half with Old Dominion, kind of got my degree in LTL from them. I like to say, on the ground in the field, was behind the wheel of a truck for a little while, working on a cross dock. Then jumped over to what some say is the dark side, as far as weights and inspections, and walking around the dock with a camera and a tape measure, and eventually an iPad, and just looking for freight that maybe was misclassified, misrepresented on the bill of lading, due to just knowledge and training issues, due to just maybe a change in the regular commodities or regular configuration of what was being shipped by that account. And it's amazing how much you learn there, where you're in the operations day to day, but you've got one foot on the pricing and the business side of LTL. It's really interesting, really steep learning curve. And then eventually moved down to North Carolina. So I'd started working in the Columbus, Ohio facility for them, which was about a 200 plus store terminal. Moved to corporate to work in the national account pricing and costing team, and did some some rollout special projects, which was really interesting. Basically, anything that fell outside of a standard LTL program, if there was no set pricing, you had to literally back your way into just figuring out what it would cost with all the physical interactions and the space in the trailer, and then price, put your margin in and set your price where you wanted it. So had a great experience there, learned a ton from all the folks at Old Dominion. And then now since 2016 have been on the managed trans and 3PL side of things. Have kind of dabbled in process, operations, pricing, procurement, technology a little bit. So just having a blast, living my best life in LTL.
Oh, thanks, Curtis. And so I'm Jill Clifford, and I'm the president here at FreightPlus. Like Curtis, I didn't start as a truck driver, but I did start my career out of high school working for St. Johnsbury Trucking, which was a Northeast regional less-than-truckload carrier. I literally started answering the phones. And if you've ever worked in a carrier terminal, the only people that call a carrier terminal are people with problems, whether they're customers or drivers. And so I got really good at solving problems. And eventually that led me to managing all of the national accounts in our terminal. So if you were a national account and your freight was moving within our terminal network, I was taking care of your freight. And lo and behold, Russ Aborn, who is the founder of what is now FreightPlus, was one of my customers. And so I joined FreightPlus back in 1993, 30 years ago, actually, last month. And
congrats.
crazy, I know. And so I've been super passionate about continuing to solve problems in our industry, whether it be for shippers or customers. And so again, before we get into this, I have to say, Curtis, I don't, in the 30 years I've been at FreightPlus, in the 5 years I've spent working in LTL prior, I don't know a single person like you who has started a career driving a truck in LTL. Weight and inspection, I know you say it lightly. That's one of the most difficult jobs in LTL, because that does give you that depth in the layers of then really understanding what the components are of an LTL rate. You don't learn that unless you're doing that type of work, which then led you to pricing and data and analytics, and then led you into the deep knowledge of really carrier sourcing strategies. And so, for as long as I've been in the industry, I've not met a person like Curtis who has such a broad and deep depth into all things LTL. So I'm super excited for today. I do feel like in all the years being in transportation and working in all modes, that less than truckload, we call it LTL, it is a little bit like international. Many years in the industry, we were dipping our toe into international freight as customers were now sourcing internationally. It was a big unknown and people were a little bit afraid of it. And I still think that exists today. And I think it exists in LTL as well. There's just a lot of unknown. In truckload, Jill, the driver, is showing up at Curtis's dock as the shipper. She's picking up that freight. She's driving it straight through and she's making a delivery to the end customer. It's pretty cut and dry. Understanding the cost of that is also cost to serve. If you're a truckload carrier, is a little bit easier. And so maybe, Curtis, we should start there. So how does one, high level LTL operate? And then two, how do you think about what derives up into an LTL rate, right? Because you have drivers and you have warehouses. There's a whole lot of cost and labor involved in LTL. And so just high level, explain the mode of LTL and then talk to us a little bit about how LTL rates are derived.
Sure. And that was an interesting comparison. You don't typically hear LTL being compared to international, but I like it. I agree. And I think that's kind of the mystery of LTL is a little bit like a lot of things, a little bit like that, a little bit like airlines, a little bit like truckload, parcel, and then all combined together, it's its own thing. So that's why, there's a sense of familiarity to it, but then a kind of a foreign aspect if people are just getting into it as well.
Yeah, and we've seen it with our clients, as we're going through our discovery with prospects and shippers and we're talking to them about programs, they may have millions of dollars of a truckload spend and they may have millions of dollars of an LTL spend, and they really understand their truckload spend and they really pay attention to it. And the LTL kind of just gets put aside. And it's actually far more difficult to manage your LTL program. So that's why I'm excited today. So talk to us about LTL.
Yeah. So LTL, at the core of everything, it's a network, right? That's the only way that you can go here, pick up a pallet, go next door, pick up 2 pallets, and just kind of ping pong around your local market as a fleet of local pickup and delivery drivers, and then bring it all back and, empty out your trailers and see what you have, see what you can combine, see what works well together. I think LTL, I've said before, it's kind of like fake automated in a way because there are a lot of standards. There's the freight classification. There's, the way these carriers, these large companies, for the most part, build out their networks and have their terminals and facilities and coverage points. It's very locked in. But
Mhm.
then two big reasons why I think, there's a lot of perceived chaos. One, it's you have this framework or this machine that is set up to pick up, process freight all the way through and deliver. But what really gets impacted is what gets put into that system. Like if it's one standard pallet that's easy to handle and it's, say, a commercial, dock to dock delivery, easy. It's, carriers can do that with their eyes closed. If it's some big awkward crate, or if it's, some big awkward crate as well as it's a non-dock delivery, or like you just keep piling on these exceptions and these different layers of variables or characteristics to each shipment that make it, push it outside of the norm. That's where things can kind of get sideways.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I mean, the way that the pricing works at its core is you typically have three major components. You've got the fuel surcharge, you've got the line haul or the base rate, as it's called, and then you've got your accessorials. And
Okay, so before we go there, if I'm
yeah,
hearing you correctly, in terms of like how the freight moves in LTL. So let's just say we're in Boston. There is a local LTL terminal in South Boston. And so drivers come in the morning, and these are called the local drivers, right? And they're going out with a full load of multiple deliveries that they're going to try to make throughout the morning. And then in the afternoon, they're going to make all their pickups, right? Then
mhm,
they bring that freight back to that local terminal where the warehouse team is unloading that freight. And then they're loading out what Curtis is speaking to, these line haul schedules. And
mhm,
then a line haul driver, so a driver who's going to drive much further, they're not making local deliveries or pickups. A different line haul driver is going to run that out to probably another terminal. So LTL carriers are built with terminal networks. So
right.
if you're running from Boston to LA, that LTL shipment may break to one, two, or three different terminals. And sometimes it might even go on the rail, depending on the length of haul. So they'll put it on, a rail car and run out that trailer. And so with that comes a lot of people,
Mhm,
right? Whether they're drivers or warehouse men. And then you have a whole operation staff and administration staff. Um, and then you have drivers. And so there's a lot of cost in that.
mhm.
And so so is that right? Like that's how we kind of
Yeah,
understand
absolutely.
LTL?
There's just to make one pickup in a local market, your South Boston example, there's a whole lot of people, process, and infrastructure behind that, which
Mhm.
all equates to cost, right? So
Yep.
yeah, you can't, and that's why there's such a high barrier to entry to the kind of the standard LTL market. You've got to have a network. You've got to have multiple brick and mortar locations, and you've got to have strategically placed, routes where you can, as you mentioned, run those line haul sets of trailers through, take it down the road maybe 200 miles, offload whatever needs to go to that market locally, and then load on top of what you already had with anything that goes further down the road. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a complex, when you look at dynamically routing your local pickup and delivery, and then kind of combining the space used, in all aspects, local and over the road, as well as just service levels, transit days, priority, it does get pretty complex,
So
managing
tricky.
all those moving parts.
And then all the demands of, supply chains have just become so much more complicated than the demands of the shippers and the receivers. You used to not even need an appointment to show up and pick up freight or deliver it.
Yeah.
And now it's like completely uncommon. Like the planning and appointing of all this freight is also far more complicated than it used to be. And
Yep.
so with that, if you're a shipper, how do you think about what are the components of that LTL rate?
So I think at their most simplistic form, if you look at the fuel, the line haul, and then the accessorial, which typically is, some sort of service or extra step performed at either pickup or delivery. Not always, but in a lot of cases, that's what it is. Most of those costs roll up to either space, time, or risk. And
Mhm.
that's what I've developed as an easy way to remember it. So on the pickup side, you've got things like asking for a lift gate. Well, there's like a tiny bit of, mechanical wear and tear cost, but it's mainly just time. The driver's going to spend a little more time picking up that freight, manually putting it on the lift gate, probably with a pallet jack of some sort, and then lifting it up and pushing it, into the rear of the trailer. It's a lot
Mhm.
quicker typically, especially when you're talking multiple pallets. It's a lot quicker just to back into a dock and have a forklift, push freight on. So
Yep.
things like that at origin and destination locations, if it's anything outside of just back into a dock at a warehouse, get loaded or unloaded relatively quickly, get your paperwork, and you're on your way. If it's anything more than that, it's typically equated to time. And then there are some risk factors too, location, whether it's suburban, downtown, like what kind of hazards are there? You see, especially up where you are, Jill, a lot of the infrastructure in these older northeastern cities, were built for another era, and
Yeah.
back when trucks were a lot smaller, generally speaking. So it is pretty risky at times with these modern LTL carriers who are running, day cab semi trucks, but full size trucks with 53-foot trailers at times.
Yeah.
They're going in and out of pretty tight locations. So
And that does impact pricing. So
yeah,
even in
for sure.
addition to accessorials, like where are you located?
Yep.
How easy? And you're right, like you're going to need a straight truck. You cannot bring a full
Right.
size trailer. Yep.
Yep.
Makes
And so the
sense.
better carriers, they're taking all these moving parts and all these variables just involved with, servicing an account, and they're looking at the data from the shipper or the 3PL. They're looking at, pictures of the freight to get a sense of how much risk is there with the freight itself, the packaging, the commodity type, is this going to be
Mhm.
susceptible to damage more so than others? And they're gathering all these factors, and they're basically building and modeling them in a cost model to emulate, hey, if we're going here to this location. They even look at if they're already in that location on behalf of another customer of theirs.
Yep.
So that's why it's important to always, give your LTL carrier as much data as you can, even street level addresses, because they use it. And if they're already in that spot, you're going to benefit from, now there's more volume for them to go in and out of. So yeah, it's a lot of moving parts, a lot of variables, but at the end of the day, they're just literally collecting and quantifying what's happening in the real world, and then modeling that in the cost model. And the goal with the carrier is we need to be very, very sure of what our costs will be. And this was the problem that got me into LTL pricing in the first place, was curiosity around, okay, I'm walking this dock and I'm looking in all these trailers, and there's just a jumble of different pallets and crates and pipes, and like, how on earth do you separate those out and figure out this one's losing me money, this one I'm profitable on, this
Yeah.
one break even? So you really can't do that without just digitally modeling, exactly what that will involve and what it might cost for you to pick up and deliver.
And do you think that's one of like so if I hear you correctly, if I'm a shipper and I'm thinking about a sourcing strategy and working in the LTL environment, I think what I'm hearing you say loud and clear is I better know the service I need. I better know the service my customers need. And I better really understand what it means to show up at my shipping sites and what it means to show up at my customers if I'm a carrier. I need to understand that, right?
Yep.
Um, and I think what we've seen in the industry, and maybe you can speak to a little bit of it. So you're negotiating a base rate, you're negotiating a discount off a base rate, and in that is line haul rate, a fuel surcharge, and then these accessorials. And I think, old school negotiations with customers, because customers were always right, was, well, I'm not going to pay for liftgate. You're going to waive liftgate.
Right.
And I'm not going to pay for appointment fees. You're going to waive those too. And I think really the message today is, you got to really understand what you need for service, and you need to negotiate those, because the reality is, if Curtis is with an LTL carrier and I'm the shipper and I say, Curtis, we're not going to pay appointment fees, they're going to say, okay, but we're just going to build that into the cost.
Yeah, totally.
And so the more risk you put on your carriers because of the unknowns that you don't know as a shipper, the more you're going to pay for freight. And so that real deep understanding of, what does my freight look like to an LTL carrier, and how is it going to operate with that LTL carrier? And then again, to your point on like the customers, man, oh man, if you're in an industry that there are specific LTL carriers that provide a high level of service to customers that you're already doing business with, you're winning. It's service first and then price. And you need to understand that. There are carriers that are very strong in the food, in the grocery, big box retail. And there are carriers that don't want that freight. And the way they tell you they don't want it is they price it high, and they don't provide a high level of service. So you're paying too much and you're not getting a good high level of service. And so I think what I'm hearing you say loud and clear is, you really got to understand, if you're a shipper, you got to really understand how this mode works, and then how to price in this mode. And really, carriers should be your partners. I always say, Curtis and I chuckle, like, this isn't a request for pricing. When Curtis and I develop a bid and a sourcing strategy and a recommendation for a shipper, we're not saying we're going out for a request for pricing. We're going out for a request for partnership. Because I'll tell you now, it used to be shippers had a good handle on carrier performance, and they would just continually tell the carrier was wrong, and the carrier underperformed, and the carrier is charging too much. And it was always kind of beat the carrier over the head with a bat.
Right.
And what we see now, and Curtis, you can probably add some color to this, is carriers do a far better job of measuring shippers' performance than the shippers actually do the carriers.
Yeah.
Would you agree? Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, for sure. And I think just like a tangible, example of something that any shipper could do today is take a week or 2 weeks and just really track and log, LTL driver in and out times, just step by step, what happened, like just kind of like quantify and nail down that experience of that driver as they come in and out of your facility, get some sense of an average time that they're, at your site, what they're doing, and then look for ways to improve to get them in and out quicker. Have the paperwork signed and ready to go. Switch to ePros if you can, so that it's they print out on the bills of lading. The driver just has to scan them instead of walking through the staging area of your dock and physically putting stickers on. If you can kind of nail the paperwork, having that ready to go. All these drivers have handheld units, they can easily scan barcodes or QR codes or what have you. So just focus on that, and then measure again. And if you can go to any of your carrier partners and say, hey, we just did a little project here. We measured what we were at for average, dwell time essentially on the pickup side for your drivers. Here's what we improved, and here's what it's at now. That will get you a pricing reduction quicker than just beating them over the head with the proverbial baseball bat and saying, hey, I'm hearing the market's soft, give me some money back. Like, that's not going to work. That's where it's a partnership.
It really is. Explain the ePro thing. How does that work?
Yeah. So one of the huge benefits of a lot of these LTL carriers being, pretty large, well-organized, well-equipped with technology companies, they want to be more efficient too. And they want to get better information earlier in the process so that they're just more efficient on the ground. Their drivers are, in and out of locations quicker. But then also the more that it's digital and there's real shipments and weights and piece counts and things like this, that enter their digital ecosystem, even while the driver's out there still in the city, they can start planning and they can start looking at, that terminal that the freight's coming back to can say, hey, we're going to need, maybe 6 trailers to this specific line haul schedule or destination today. So it helps everybody. It reduces their costs. So basically an ePro, you can get a bank of literally digital electronic pro numbers from a carrier. And if your DMS or your, tendering system is set up, when you tender the shipment, you also give them that electronic pro, tell them, hey, you're coming for this. It's, 1,500 pounds, 3 pallets. Here's the pro number that's going to be on it. And then that is already entered in the carrier's side, a lot quicker. It matches for tracking, like the next day when you go to track the shipment after it's in the carrier's possession, it just makes that whole digital connection a lot quicker.
Yep.
And it's just, it's generally a better idea. It reduces billing errors. I'm sure everyone's experienced duplicate pros, or, one pro is scanned at pickup and then another is somehow billed or attached to the account. So it kind of eliminates that.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the benefits here. So if you can get digitally connected with this ePro, one, the driver has a better experience. They're in and out of there a lot faster. Your shipping team has a better experience because that work is done a lot faster. And I think even the broader picture, when you start talking about sourcing strategies, so just say you're negotiating LTL on behalf of your company as a shipper, and you're in this ePro environment and you've created this efficiency for the carrier. And in addition to creating the efficiency of time at pickup, man, oh man, you're allowing that carrier to plan their line haul.
Exactly.
Much of what they get in is very unexpected. It happens the day of. And so if you can drive value and say to a carrier, I'm going to give you visibility to my forecast and my plan, and doing that with eProing and allowing them to have visibility ahead of day of pickup of how many pallets, where they're going, man, they can plan that line haul. And that in and of itself should be part of your negotiation strategy.
Totally. Right? Absolutely. If you think about it, as most people go to a carrier, in an RFP environment with shipment data of some sort, but it's typically really only representing like from a shipment, historical shipment or set of shipments from when the carrier picked it up to when they delivered it. There's not typically a lot of like pre-pickup, information. But if you're generating that ePro hours or even potentially a day or more before the carrier actually picks it up, include that in your data. You can say, here's where we all kind of came online and we agreed, hey, there's going to be a shipment here to pick up at this date. We're giving the carrier more lead time. Absolutely. If they can plan better and route, more efficiently just on the ground, as well as for that line haul or those line haul schedules, that'll be reflected in your pricing for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And so I want to jump into the technology and data and how that supports the strategy. But before we do that, I think we got, if I could tie this a little bit in a bow, I think we got high level how LTL works, right? And then if you're looking for not a request for pricing, but a request for partnership with your LTL carriers, service first, right? So understanding where your pickups are, where your deliveries are, what LTL carriers are already working in some of these customer deliveries or some of maybe your outside warehouse pickups, and having a good experience. You really want to understand service. So vet those carriers for service, and then you want to develop your request for partnership, and that better be very data heavy. You really want to be able to provide shipment level data, physical addresses, weights of shipments, location masters, hours of operation at locations. And then, what Curtis speaks to is those accessorials. what's going to be needed at pickup and or delivery? Is there a lift gate involved? Is there a sort and seg involved? Meaning, is my driver going to have to unload this freight and sort and seg these cartons on the receiver's stock? Is there a call for delivery appointment? Is it a call, or do I have to go into a portal? Do I, as the carrier, have to pay for this portal in order to make these appointments?
Yeah.
All those things need to be addressed for your request for partnership. So you've got that down, right? So now you've gone out to the market, you've vetted those carriers, you're going to ask a handful of them to participate in this request for partnership. You deliver them what they need, and those carriers bring you back a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's maybe where we could start, like, how does technology and how you think about data and data analysis dealing with, one, reviewing of all this pricing,
Mm-hmm.
two, then operating this freight. I think I've said this till I'm blue in the face, but we still see it. So I'm going to say it again. If you are not in a digital environment as it relates to orders becoming shipments, becoming loads, and visibility of where those are, you are way behind. Way behind. And so we're going to speak to why this technology and data is so important. And please, if you have any questions, pop them into the comments. I'm looking at them as Curtis and I are chatting, because this is really important. So how do you understand using technology and data to support your negotiation strategy, and then also to support you in a live environment as you're trying to get your inbound materials in, your outbound to customer freight picked up and delivered intact and on time?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good place to start. And the biggest question that kind of the first like batch of technology or form of technology is, what exactly are you going to be paying, and how do you choose, who's the better fit for that account, or even that, that lane specifically. So you've got to have the right technology and tools to model the pricing, model the transit times, some level of proficiency or knowledge of each carrier's proficiency with different types of locations, be it retail, grocery, industrial, residential, all these different, different areas where LTL is growing in all of them, for sure. And so if you're a shipper of any, size, even small business shippers, like, you're not going to get sent quotes and prices typically, unless you just send a couple, shipment examples to get priced. But you're going to get sent some documents that may look like another language. It's going to reference a rate base. It's going to potentially reference an FAK structure, which is connected to the rated freight class versus what it actually might be. You're going to have discounts and minimum charges. You're going to have a fuel schedule. So a lot of folks, if they aren't familiar, don't have the right tools to actually model and quantify and analyze that pricing, are just, they just end up looking at a discount saying, hey, well, this is the highest discount. But maybe they do or don't know, like, the rate base matters too, so
Yes.
Just broadly speaking, an 85% discount off carrier A's just proprietary current rate tariff, where they just took a GRI in January, that's probably going to be a much worse price than, even a 40% discount off of like an older base rate. So
Right. So that's a great point. When LTL carriers release their general rate increase, they're not changing your discount. They're taking those increases in the base rates. And so you'll see every LTL carrier will release their annual GRI, which updates their base rate. And so, a good practice, what we would highly recommend, if you go to 5 LTL carriers and you say, I want an 85% discount, and they're all going to use their own base rates, they're all different. And so if you give them all an identical shipment from and to the same place, and they're working off their own base rate, the cost of that shipment is going to be 5 different costs.
Yeah.
And so the way you level the playing field is you start with a like base rate, and they are adopting that. You absolutely can do it. But like you said, if you can't measure the bids, how do you know? So I think what I hear you saying is you need tools to really deep dive those bids.
Yeah, you're basically given a proposal is like a formula saying this is how we're going to price your business. But because LTL, is so flexible and can handle a 50-pound, small single pallet or a 10, 11,000 pound, large shipment. So
Right.
they're giving you the framework and the method for pricing. And then that's where you've got to be able to apply that, and you mentioned earlier, Jill, with another common, I won't say trick, even though I just said it, but little method over the years has been, all right, that maybe uneducated shipper is going to look at the discount, and then they're going to look at certain accessorial fees being waived. But to your
Right.
point earlier, and I've done this, in pricing on the carrier side, and it just makes sense. Like they're gonna quantify the impact and say, okay, we're gonna waive appointment. How many times, like what percentage of their freight needs appointments? We generally know, for either a portal appointment setting or a clerk at the terminal to call, kind of know the time and cost involved. So
Yep.
we're basically going to say, at the end of the year, it's this, we're going to spend this much money on setting appointments. So we do need to adjust the discount on the line haul side to make up for that.
That's
So
right. Yep.
that's where the LTL pricing components, the fuel, the accessorials, and the line haul can kind of just be like a pie, and each one is a piece in the pie, and you can sometimes get one piece of pie shrunk, and it
Yep.
looks great, but then another one is slightly enlarged just to make up for that.
So before we move off of using tools, technology, and analytics to measure bids, I want to move into like visibility in a live environment with technology. But before we go there, we have a question. So, Curtis, what kind of tools are available to compare different base rates and discounts? And I'm gonna go on a limb here and say this is a shipper question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, much like the carriers are modeling, what is going to be done on the ground and quantifying, hey, if we're spending 10 minutes at pickup on average, the freight is this much weight on average, like they're modeling it. It's very similar where if you're a shipper or a third party, you have to have access to all three of those components. You have to be able to model a fuel surcharge. You have to be able to account for and model any, accessorials at origin or destination or connected to the lane or you might look at, like, most carriers have a California compliance fee. You got to know to include that, that
Right.
$12, $15 or whatever it is. So, and then
what technical tools, are there any technical tools available in the market to shippers so that if they consumed, let's say, 3 different base rates, 3 different discounts, FAK structures, what are they using for tools? Or actually, you can speak to our tools, like how we manage that tooling.
Yeah. So with API rating being a lot more mainstream now, you can do some level of batch rating and quote carriers through API, but the limitation there is it's got to be an active, account already set up with pricing coded to it. So still, I would say at this point in time, the best way is to, have some sort of connection through your TMS or some sort of batch rating system. MercuryGate has, a module called Edge. Other TMS platforms out there, and specifically pricing and analytical platforms, they've got some form of send to SMC3, generally the origin, the destination, the weight, and the class, and then you get that base rate back. That's kind of that's the key to being able to model and manipulate this. And then whether it's in a software or a spreadsheet or whatever you're comfortable with, you can then apply discounts, minimums, and your fuel upcharge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say there's probably more just homegrown, like in-house type solutions cobbled together. There's a few market ready, like off the shelf solutions out there. Most of them, I would say, are tied specifically to like, hey, use our TMS, which is this big,
Right.
huge product, and then you get this, as a part of it. So
Right.
we
And
use a
I would say,
combination. We've built some
yep.
of our own stuff internally for our customers. We're actually actively working on making that better now,
Hmm.
just for analysis and contract management perspectives. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's hard.
it is. It's very hard. I had a conversation on the phone yesterday with someone that just like they're kind of like moving around the numbers and getting to something that might make sense to them, but typically it's not really the way LTL pricing works, unfortunately.
No. And so I think from a tooling perspective, you could start exploring SMC3
Yeah.
to step one. And then what we would tell you is the risk of we in our many combined years of experience in LTL and putting together complicated LTL programs for shippers, there isn't one place to go. And so internally here, Curtis and myself and our LTL teams, we use a lot of different products. Some of them we built, some of them we subscribe to really pull off a deep dive, heavily layered review of carrier proposals. And
Mhm.
I think the other thing, when you talk about, I think it's a good segue into really talking about strategy. So it used to be maybe you reviewed these bids and then you went forth with a state to state route guide. And you can't really do that anymore, right? Because customers have different requirements now. They're almost like routing guides down to the zip level. And then in addition to that, you really got to think about your strategy with the carriers, right? So using too many carriers for a little bit of freight isn't cost prohibitive, right? And then the other part of it is really we're now like speak a little bit too. So this whole idea of you get pricing back using the low cost carrier every day, we would say bad idea. We know people start there, like who's the cheapest? That's who I'm going to use. Bad
Mhm.
idea. Service first. So if you've done this
Mhm.
right, you've vetted those carriers, you know what you need to service. Now you've got to build, okay, where am I going to use these carriers? So let's say I landed on 2 regionals, 1 long haul. Now I've got to land on really a dynamic route guide. And then in some cases too, dynamic pricing, because that comes into play where
Mhm.
you can use a national LTL carrier, go into contract with them, and then they're also going to offer you dynamic pricing, which is going to be very helpful to you. So how do you think about it? Isn't I called it kind of route guide, but as you get these bids back and now you're thinking about what is the sourcing strategy on who I'm going to use and where I'm going to use them, how do you think about that, Curtis? Because it isn't just, I think most people knee jerk it and say whoever the lowest cost bidder is who I'm going to use, and I'm going to set up my TMS, which is a transportation management system. I'm
Mhm.
going to set it up to tell me every day who's the cheapest carrier in the lane. And
Yeah.
we believe that's a really bad approach. So how do
Yeah.
you think about the approach?
Yeah, I think the best way is again just having a really good understanding and being able to model and quantify what carriers are good at beyond that, that just first upfront rate. So I think historically a lot of carriers, as the TMS in general became more prevalent in the industry, their reaction was this is only a price shopping tool, right? We're just going to be put there in the lineup next to our competitors. And if we're not the cheapest up at the top, then we're probably not getting the freight. And unfortunately, some shippers and third
Still
parties do
happens.
run it that way. Yeah. So
Mhm.
the carriers are not,
That's the
they're not
request
wrong.
for pricing, not the request for
Right.
partnership.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
when you have systems where you can, not only as you partner with these carriers over time and learn more about them, but also just, during that RFP event, ask questions, ask about their capabilities, like where, how many doors do they have at that facility where you have a big outbound location? What's their local driver count and fleet size? And
Mhm.
pull all these attributes back into not only just what they're going to charge you up front, but also, how well suited they are for the freight. And that's where it's more of like, a lot of folks just look at, hey, let's negotiate better pricing. Let's be strong at the table. Let's get that bat out again, and let's just win. But in LTL, there's so many other variables. I think if you look at it as more of a calibration of, it's really just a match, like kind of a complex matching exercise.
It is.
You want to find the right shipment in the right lanes. And it's going to depend on, like, we have a customer that sometimes ships over length items, sometimes they don't. There's, sometimes heavy service aspect with, delivery accessorials and appointments, and sometimes not. So you can't just route the freight and award it and give it to a carrier only based on a geographical lane pairing. You've got to pay attention to basically the attributes of that specific shipment, including commodity class, dimensions, service requirements, as well as the attributes of the carriers that you want to potentially give it to.
Yep.
So it's more about the best carrier, not the cheapest carrier.
Yeah, and I would say it's completely impossible to pull off without technology, product, and tools.
Oh yeah,
it's impossible. And I think that's where people get stuck in that low cost carrier option. And I think low cost always means more cost, to your point, because inevitably you look at low cost option, you're not getting the right service, and then you're paying more for that service because it isn't the right one, whether the customer is charging you back, whether there's a service delay, like all that is additional costs that people don't consider, again, because they're after a request for price, not a request for partnership.
Yep.
Okay, so I have some questions for you. I think as we talk about this, and we hear it a lot here at FreightPlus as we're working with shippers and even our customers, and sometimes sometimes carriers too. I think talk to us a little bit about market. So we hear a lot over and over again. Are we ever getting back to pre-COVID? And then just to keep it more defined. So are we ever getting back to pre-COVID? And what do we see as market predictions for 2024 in the LTL market?
Yeah, I mean, to bluntly answer the first question, no, I don't believe that we're ever going back to how things were pre-COVID. There's just been too many big changes, too many dynamics, from multiple parties in the equation. Carriers, even in this short 2 to 3 year period, have shot ahead with how much better they've gotten at allocating their labor and their resources and collecting. There's still more and more scales and dimensioners and all these tools being bought by LTL carriers out there, even currently, to better get a handle on, like, we need to know space, time, and risk, right? Like, there's so much. Back in the day, it was cover the floor and shut the door and send the trailer down the road.
That's right.
And they had no idea, how much space was being taken up. It was just they had the total of the weight, and that was pretty much it. But yeah,
so
carriers
cover the floor and shut the door. We should be using that. You got to use that somewhere.
Yeah. So no, there's no going back. Like, from what we measure at FreightPlus with just carrier on-time pickup and delivery performance, as well as your exceptions, in the world of damaged, refused freight, it's not awful right now. It's probably the best it's been in a long time, but it's still not pre-COVID levels. And just for various reasons, like, labor is a huge issue, not just at the carriers, but at these warehouses, where they need to get loaded or unloaded in a timely manner. And you really saw in retail or grocery, where there's the high usage of lumper, agencies. That's just another complexity thrown in. That's typically another third party. They don't, they're not direct employees of that warehouse or of the carrier. So they have their own set of incentives, right? And it's just, there's always friction when you're coupling together multiple entities to perform a task. And that's why in LTL, if there is a shipment that goes on the rail, or there's outsourced transportation where they give it to maybe a truckload carrier for some of that long haul, there's always just a little bit higher risk for visibility to go down, exceptions to go up, and that sort of thing. And that's why carriers that control and own more of their network and their infrastructure, while it is a harder business to run, it's costlier. There's probably more financial risks, but from a service side and continuity and visibility, they're able to put a better product out there.
Yeah. And so what do you see for 2024 as an LTL market? Are rates going up? Is service dropping? We had these kind of two big black swan events in a very short amount of time in 2023 with the yellow closure, SD cyber attack. You would assume market will go up for LTL in 2024. But what do you think?
So from a service side, I think if it's measured correctly, it's going to stay either consistent with now or even slightly go up, because I do think quarters 1 and 2 will be a bit flatter.
Okay.
So, and what I mean by measured correctly is, as we all just get more complex and there's more exceptions, in the world of LTL with must arrive by delivery dates and appointments and all drop trailers and all these things that are kind of built and put out there to accommodate the customer on either side, it then becomes harder to measure performance, right? You can't just have this super high level, binary thing. It was either picked up when I said I wanted it picked up, and it was delivered or not delivered when I said it needed to be there. Like, that just doesn't work. And that's unfortunately the way a lot of folks measure performance. So if you're in the nuance and you either have, people with the experience to look at all these factors, look at when the freight got to the delivering terminal, because if it got there with enough time to make delivery within the carrier's published transit time, it's not necessarily their fault if the consignee wanted, an appointment 2 days later. So that would not be a late shipment in my books. That would be, they got it to where it needed to go. They could have delivered it. They probably wanted to deliver it because they don't like holding on to freight.
Right.
And an appointment was set. So if carrier performance is looked at through that lens, and I'll call out one other, there's a carrier out there that actually has implemented like a customer point of view tracking system, or not tracking system, but just way to grade themselves on their own performance. So that's kind of an interesting two-way street example where, we have to allow for understanding of the carrier's constraints and the way their businesses operate. We can't judge them necessarily off just when we wanted those things done. But at the same time, carriers need to do better at having that customer point of view. And it's Roadrunner who's been working on that a lot, where, they're not allowing themselves to say like, oh, it was handed off to a partner, so we're good, we delivered it, whatever happens, or whether there's still acts of God, there's still weather issues, there's still chaos, where maybe it is justified in adding another service day. But for the most part, a lot of carriers have developed these lists, these long lists of service exception reason codes.
That makes it okay when it's not okay.
Like, not sorry, clause 22B applies here. It's actually not late. So it's collaborative, intelligent quantifying of the service. So if you're looking at it right, I think it's gonna remain or get better. Pricing, nothing's getting cheaper. If you look at steel and rubber and all these basic components that it takes to build terminals and create equipment, trailers, trucks, people to drive them, to work the dock, nobody's taking pay cuts. You can't attract good labor anymore and lower your price, right? So those are not the ways you're going to help your carrier save money. You can't say, well, pay your employees less or use older equipment or, get a deal on the used old beat up terminal. Like, you don't want them doing those things because that's going to affect your service in a big way.
Right.
You want them buying the newest equipment, hiring the best people, keeping them happy and engaged, and giving them great benefits and good pay. So to do all that, it costs a lot of money. And I think there's this kind of like layer, multiple layers of, here's what a carrier needs just to get the minimum viable infrastructure to be an option as a carrier. Then there's this layer that some do better than others, where they're spending strategically and planning ahead and buying land and developing their network. And then the third is like this, whether it's the shipper or third party, they have somehow this layer of, well, this they shouldn't make that much money, or this account
Right.
shouldn't be priced this high. Like, it's you got to throw kind of those preconceived expectations out the window. I mean, you definitely, and what we do here, of course, is compare competitors to competitors and look at price, service, capability, record around performance and
Yeah.
and things like that. Absolutely.
And then knowing and really understanding the market. So there is,
Right.
without tooting your own horn, but there is this subject matter expertise that is critically important. If I'm in supply chain for a shipper or I own the carrier relationships, it is a full-time job understanding LTL market,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding what drives LTL pricing, what drives LTL costs, so that you can effectively negotiate a good sourcing strategy.
Yeah.
And then you couple that with, we see a lot of times where there may be solid subject matter expertise within a shipper, but their hands are tied behind their back because they don't have access to any tools to really analyze and understand and then put the best practice in place.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's why we took a 30-year consulting firm and transitioned into a managed transportation service.
Right.
Is our consulting clients, our shippers, were at a disadvantage. We were putting together with them these very complicated supply chains. Are complicated. They're much more harder, much more difficult than they were even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were putting together these pretty complicated transportation programs, turning them over to our shippers, and they couldn't get them implemented. They didn't have the right people. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the financial resource to go out and get the product and the technology that they needed. And so we just did it for them.
Right.
And I think the other thing we don't talk about a lot is, as you're talking about how carriers view the world, how they view you as a shipper, how they view your freight. If you're not in a digital environment today with a carrier, you're costing them money.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
you actually don't understand your shipments and how they move and how they stack up against market and how they look at what they look like against your competition, like in
Mm-hmm.
your industry, you're not driving any value to the carrier and you're actually increasing their cost. And so
Yep.
when you think about, this is why we transitioned into a managed trans service, is to help these shippers solve problems as it related to getting into a best practice with their transportation programs. But let me tell you, it helps the carriers too.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah. The
take
way.
all these shippers and get them out of a manual environment and
Yeah.
and understand the freight curse, like not having someone just beat you up all day long over price. Like, we truly value the carrier partnership, and we want to understand what's going to put them in the best position to be most successful, to
Right.
provide a high level of service at the right price. Without that mindset, you're not going to get good service. And I think that's why customers come to us, understanding that I am at a disadvantage in the market when I can't bring this level of process, people, technology to my sourcing strategy and really treat these carriers as partners.
Yep. Absolutely. It really becomes a similar sell. Like, all the benefits and the value
Mm-hmm.
add that our sales folks go into shipper prospects and talk about are very transferable. And having someone understand your business, understand your network, be a fair, reasonable business partner, proactively
Mhm.
push information towards you that helps you do your job better. Like,
Yep,
you say things like that, and it's almost hard to tell, am I talking about a shipper or a carrier? Because
it's
it's
so
very
true. Yeah,
for
they're
sure.
critical.
So
They are.
yeah,
Well,
back
this
to
was
so
great.
one thing just real quick. So the market
Yep.
is not going down, right? Market is going up. So I wouldn't advise you go to your carrier and say things are soft, give me a better price. They're not going to haul the same business at a lower rate. But what
Yep.
we do have now is an unprecedented opportunity to make those changes and those upgrades, like that example with, monitor and fix your dwell time on the pickup side.
Hmm.
You have all these ways to set yourself apart now as a shipper, where if
Yep.
you can show it and prove what you're doing, that's where there's huge advantages to getting lower pricing. But it's not going to be just by saying you want it.
Nope, agreed. Thanks so much for all of your insight here, Curtis. It's invaluable. I hope if you're listening and watching that you enjoyed this. I think what would be great is a follow up and we kind of deep dive into performance and how to think
Mhm.
about and measure performance. How the carriers are measuring you may not be what you would expect. And so I think a good discussion around performance and deep diving that. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar or LinkedIn Live. I'm not sure what to call it. I'm old school, but
It's
thanks so much.
both. Yeah, thanks for having me, Jill. Great talking to you as
Yeah, it was
always.
fun.
Yeah, let's do this again soon.
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.